of running a brick-and-mortar casino poker room. From 2001 to 2005, online poker revenues grew from $82.7 million to an incredible $2.4 billion. In 2006, however, online poker in the U.S. experienced an incredible setback with the Unlawful Internet Gambling Enforcement Act. Several groups have since been created in opposition to the Unlawful Internet Gambling Enforcement Act, including the Poker Players Alliance and the Safe and Secure Internet Gambling Initiative, both of which I will include links in the video description. Online poker within the U.S. has experienced some major setbacks, but the industry is still thriving and available to U.S. citizens through a limited amount of sites, which are included in the video description below. In my opinion, along with many others, poker should not be considered internet gambling, since it is a game of skill and mental aptitude comparable to games such as chess, and therefore should not be included within the internet gambling genre. Thanks for watching, my poker players. If you haven't hit that subscribe button, make sure you do it now. Give this video a thumbs up if you liked it, share it with anyone who might be interested, and if you have any comments or questions, leave those in the comment section below. In the next video, we will get back to the 100K challenge, and I will expand on the evolution of online poker in a later video as well.
Upon me will be met upon you 1,000-fold. Touch not, lest ye be destroyed. And that was for my master. That is called a reversal of fortune, beast. Called a reversal of fortune, beast. Touch not, lest he be destroyed. Security protocol 1-3. How many surprises do you hide, little one? This makes my eyes water. You should say, get more bullets, damn it! Is it? That is all you have? Zombie brains make for bad sushi. Warning, re-entry detected. All security personnel on high alert. Ooh, that doesn't sound good.
Take a pack of cards, cut them, shuffle them, and deal them out. We can play games with them, create magical illusions with them, or use them to see into the future. But is card playing merely an innocent pastime, or a device of diabolical practice?
Playing cards were everything that God had forbid.
People walk up to me and say, "You know you are doing Satan's work here because he lives in those cards."
From the Knights Templar to the priestesses of voodoo, the history of playing cards is a dark tale of mystery, mysticism, and the black arts. What lies hidden in their numbers and symbols? And if there are secrets, who holds them? The future may be written in the cards, but their past is not so clear. Their origins are the subject of fierce debate. There are conflicting histories that link the playing card to India, to Persia, or to conscript soldiers from Egypt. But most specialists think that the playing cards developed in China, alongside other games such as dominoes and mahjong.
The first definite reference to playing cards occurs in China in 1294.
China, as a nation, was the inventor of many, many items outside of playing cards. Certainly invented paper, invented printing on the mulberry bark originally.
And there are notable similarities between the cards of today and those found in China 800 years ago.
There is a further support in the fact that the earliest Chinese cards known have got coins on them. And the Spanish European cards have got, of course, coins as one of the suit signs.
But it's almost impossible to find very early evidence of playing cards.
Obviously, the cards themselves haven't survived. They are far too fragile and ephemeral.
Especially after printing was invented, you played with a pack of cards. When they became dirtier, you took a new pack of cards and threw the old ones away.
An alternative theory holds that cards may have been invented first in Persia. From there, they spread east to India and China, and west to Egypt. So it's probable that playing cards arrived in Europe from Egypt.
The cards from which European cards can be shown to have derived are cards from Egypt of the Mamluk Empire of the 14th century.
Mamelukes were originally slaves, imported into Egypt from Turkey and Russia for the army, and trained as cavalry to fight for their Muslim rulers. In time, the Mamelukes became a powerful political class that dominated Egypt from the 13th century. They established thriving trade links with southern Europe.
Trade is the main way through which the playing cards arrived in Europe. We can imagine that traders in Alexandria, fascinated by this new game they saw, and finally they brought it with them to their native countries.
The Mameluke cards display intriguing similarities to modern cards. They clearly show 4 suits.
They are swords, polo sticks, cups or goblets, and coins. These represent the interests and pastimes and occupations of the Mamluk aristocracy.
The game of polo was known to be popular among the Mamelukes. And the sticks, or the batons, which later became clubs in the modern playing cards, appear to be a direct derivative from that. At least that is one of the theories.
The other Mameluke suits, swords, cups, and coins, are exactly the same as those in use in Italy and Spain today. Once playing cards had arrived in southern Europe, it seems they traveled northwards very rapidly.
Well, a sign of their popularity and spreading is certainly all these records we have, either laws against gambling or simple princely accounts.
In 1377, a Dominican friar, John of Rheinfeldt, described the appearance of playing cards in Basel in Switzerland. And accounts belonging to the Duke of Brabant in Belgium noted a high outlay for the purchase of new packs. 15 years later, in France, there is a record of a Jacquemin Grigonneur being paid 56 Parisian sols for gilded cards for the king.
This spread seems to have been very rapid and very massive. So one of the historians in Germany has used the expression Spielkarteninvasion, invasion of playing cards.
It's an apt expression because armies traveling through Europe were some of the most important carriers of the playing card from one country and culture to another.
Much easier to carry a pack of cards around in a soldier's knapsack than a chessboard or a backgammon board.
Medievalists think that these traveling armies were almost certainly responsible for the eventual arrival of playing cards in England.
The beginning of the 15th century saw the latter part of the 100 Years' War between England and France, so it seems more than likely that playing cards must have come from France into England in that part of the century.
After that, packs of cards were taken across the Atlantic to the New World, also in the pockets of soldiers and on the ships of explorers.
Cards were taken up and appealed to Native Americans too. They didn't have the wherewithal to produce printed cards on paper themselves, so you get letter cards with their own suit symbols and their own designs on them from the earliest days of colonization.
In fact, the early designs and motifs of playing cards shifted and changed considerably as different cultures stamped their own meanings and symbols on the pack. For example, in Italy and Spain, the deck continued to carry the Mameluke suits of swords, batons, cups and coins, but the German suits instead reflected the greater importance of rural concerns in their way of life, using acorns, hawk bells, hearts and leaves.
People who were painting and designing cards in Europe were casting around for symbols that were easy to do and pretty to look at, but based on something they had already seen.
In France, card makers elected for a more radical redesign using very basic symbols.
The French invention of using two colors only, red for the hearts and diamonds, and spades and clubs in black, was really a very convenient commercial consideration.
This allowed the French card makers to make cards in a simpler way, but with a better paper, a better quality, a better readability.
The French experiment was a great success, with the result that their design became the basis for the contemporary pack of cards used all over the world.
And the major suit systems which we now know today all became established by the end of the 15th century and have not greatly modified since.
The influence of different cultures and customs has also determined the design of the court or picture cards. Early packs contained no queens, reflecting the fact that courts of royalty were almost entirely male-dominated. One of the earliest detailed accounts describes the pack as follows.
4 suits, 52 cards, 13 cards per suit, and 3 courts. But the courts it describes are a king and 2 marshals, no queen.
To this day, Italian, Spanish and German cards have variations of the 3 male court cards and still no queen. The exception to the rule is the French design, which does include a female noble.
There are many explanations for this. A traditional one is that the French are courteous people, and French gallantry is translated into the playing cards with the queen, which is perhaps not untrue.
By the end of the 14th century, the pleasures of the playing card were causing a sensation throughout Europe, and their universal appeal cut across both cultural and class divides. Anxiety that their distracting influence would lead to an increase in gambling and immoral behavior among the lower classes also increased. Church and state authorities felt compelled to intervene. In an attempt to control the sale and use of playing cards, their measures revolved around two of life's certainties: death and taxes.
Geschiedenis is wat er honderden, duizenden, zelfs miljoenen jaren geleden gebeurde.
This thing was the most dangerous and nastiest animal on planet Earth.
Maar nu wordt er ook geschiedenis gemaakt.
We're forging a new history here every day.
History is het enige kanaal waar je geschiedenis opnieuw beleeft en ziet hoe historische gebeurtenissen de toekomst kunnen beïnvloeden. Een vooruitblik op 2009.
I'm Don Wildman, and I make history every day.
So this really changes how we think language may have evolved.
Not everyone can do this job. Can separate the boys from the men.
This is the most terrifying dinosaur that ever walked the earth.
The origin of life is tough. It's a tough problem.
If you screw up, you're very likely going to be dead.
Geschiedenis wordt elke dag gemaakt. History.
When playing cards were first introduced to Europe, they were handmade, expensive, and enjoyed almost exclusively by the nobility. That soon changed. As cheaper printing methods developed, playing cards became more widely available. But the growing popularity of card games inevitably saw a rise in one of the most ancient of pastimes: gambling.
Up to the end of the 18th century, people never played at anything without gambling. So gambling was intrinsically tied to the playing cards, of course.
In the deck of cards, with its huge variety of possible games, gambling had found its perfect partner, much to the dismay of the ecclesiastical hierarchy.
Overall, the church did everything it could to stop gaming with cards. And in fact, some of our earliest historical documents are sermons against using playing cards.
The Catholic Church began to issue strongly worded edicts restricting and sometimes even forbidding the playing of cards.
One of the reasons why gambling was prohibited was obviously that it led to a lot of dishonesty and a lot of crime.
The ban on the cards was because they caused drunkenness and fighting among the people.
Over the following 100 years, examples of these church edicts across Europe reveal just how seriously the playing card was viewed as an evil influence. The city of Florence passed a statute on gambling in 1376, forbidding the card game known as Nabe. Two years later, in Germany, it was declared that gambling for high stakes was punishable by a fine. Saint Bernardino of Siena went a step further.
Bernardine of Siena preached against gaming at Bologna in 1423 so persuasively that the populace consigned their cards in thousands to a public bonfire.
In England also, church and state considered the playing of cards a scourge and were quick to try and control the practice. In the 15th century, Parliament forbade card games except on the 12 days of Christmas. In the 16th century, Henry VIII complained that too much card playing was distracting his bowmen from their target practice. Then, in the 17th century, a group of card makers petitioned the king to grant them a royal charter.
Charles I, who was keen to find finance to fund his battles in the Civil War, he granted the company a charter in 1628.
The petitioners, who flourished to this day, became the Worshipful Company of Makers of Playing Cards.
the company, which would have been about 27 strong at that time, were then in a position to set about protecting the trade, stopping the imports of French playing cards into the country. So it was a pretty key subject to them.
But in return, Charles I imposed a tax on every pack of cards the Worshipful Company made. The tax quickly rose to sixpence. That's about £3 in today's money.
Anything that is popular enough and addictive, drinking, smoking, cards, were easy to tax. And people were addicted to playing cards. It became very, very important and proved to be an excellent income.
The duty continued to rise, eventually reaching 2 shillings and sixpence, nearly £15 for an ordinary pack of cards.
A tax of 2 and 6, that was quite a substantial amount. It wasn't something that poor people would have been paying readily.
To try and prevent tax evasion, the stamp for the Ace of Spades was held by Customs and Excise, and every time a member of the Worshipful Company made a pack of cards, the ace was only issued to him once the duty had been paid. But inevitably, some card makers still attempted to avoid paying the tax.
And in fact, in 1805, Richard Harding was sentenced to death at the Old Bailey for forging an Ace of Spades.
Which is perhaps why the Ace of Spades is considered to be so unlucky. In other parts of Europe, where the cost of playing cards was much lower, people took advantage of the fact that at that time, only the faces of the cards were printed.
Because it was sturdy material, it could be easily used for anything you can do with paper.
So the blank backs of playing cards offered all manner of possibilities, even as a form of currency.
This is the very, very first diners card, even before there was a diners card. This card is a meal coupon, and it was given out in 1788 to 17 soldiers who went marching from one city in Belgium to another city. So with this card, the soldiers could pay their meal at the innkeeper, and the innkeeper could get his money with this card from the commander.
The backs of playing cards have also been used for love letters, invitations, and for drawing escape maps during the Second World War. Perhaps the most extraordinary use of playing cards occurred in the Netherlands in the 18th century. Poverty drove the poorest women to leave their babies at orphanages. These mothers left a message on the back of a playing card to give their abandoned children some form of ID.
In many cases, the mother used a playing card, because a playing card was the cheapest paper they could find.
The cards usually carried the name of the child and a heart-rending plea from the mother.
These are all very dramatic cries for help, and we find texts like, my daughter is sick and will not eat. This is a card that says, if God has heard my prayer, Gijs, that's a boy's name in Holland, will not die, I have no more food. And that's all that was written on.
If the card was cut in half, it was a sign that the mother would return one day with her matching half to reclaim the baby. If the card was complete, it meant the child was abandoned forever.
So there's a lot of drama in a simple playing card.
The history of playing cards is a turbulent tale of religion, politics, and social upheaval. Every pack that survives holds fascinating information about the life and times of its owners. But there are some people who believe the images on the playing cards hide a darker purpose, and that they are the tools of sinister, secret societies.
That's what not to do with the chainsaw.
X-Men. Elke donderdag om 8 uur op History. 300 Spartanen. Tegen 1 miljoen Perzen. Superhelden. Of Hollywood-hysterie.
The Battle of Thermopylae has been mythologized throughout history and in movies today, but it's not so.
300 Spartans. Vrijdag om 9:05.
I'm here with legendary poker champion, Doyle Brunson. And I'm here with one of my oldest and dearest friends, the mad genius of poker himself, Mac Farrell. And we're here for I Amplify Poker University to present freshman, sophomore, junior, senior courses taking you from where you are right now into big profit of the big games. Welcome to I Amplify Poker University, freshman course.
Doyle says something that is monumentally important in poker. And if you don't understand it, you're going to go broke. It's about poker and whether or not it's a game of people. Is it?
Yes, poker is about people. There's no magical formula that's the correct way to play, regardless of what anybody tells you. There are powerful general guidelines that we'll talk about, but decisions are based on who you are against at that particular moment. The way you play poker depends mostly on two things. The ante structure is very important, because the amount of money that's in the pot, those antes and those blinds, they got to be measured against the amount of money in front of you. In No Limit, the higher percentage of your stack that's anteed, the more liberal you got to play. A lower percentage would mean that you can be more selective. The other main thing is who you're playing against. The way the other player plays dictates the way you must play. If there are wild, loose players who bet and call consistently, you're forced to play ABC poker, which means seldom bluffing or using deceptive tactics. There's no use to try to bluff a player who's almost certainly going to call you. Instead of taking chances, you just wait for the quality hands and then you punish your opponent to the maximum. On the other hand, if the table is playing passively and very conservatively, then's the time to start betting and bluffing more. Always keep in mind how much money is in the pot when formulating a plan of attack. A third category of players, found commonly among the higher limits, are pros and accomplished amateurs. Now it becomes a mind game between you and the better players. Always try to get inside your opponent's head and play against him based on what you think that he's feeling at that moment. I personally like to compete against these players because it's so much more challenging. You can bring your entire arsenal of weapons into play, and the stronger-willed person will usually win. So stay very focused.
If you can't understand that poker is about people and not just the cards that you hold, you'll have a tough time ever winning.
Not only will you have a tough time winning, I think it's impossible for you to win.
It is. I'm convinced that the top poker players will make great psychologists.
Doyle Brunson said it best way back when, I think 1978 in Super System, when he said, "Don't bluff a sucker." Explain that to us.
You mean back when the meter hit the
Yeah,
earth to kill the dinosaurs?
way back when we were young'uns.
Well, I mean, that is true. It's, you know, why bluff at somebody that's going to call you? One of my best friends was Sailor Ramos, who's passed away now. He was one of the greatest players I ever saw. But he had a lot of bad habits, so I staked him a lot of times. And I had him staked in the World Series of Poker one night. And And there was an old farmer from Nebraska. His name was Milo Jacobson. And this guy would just call everything. And Sailor kept bluffing at him. I'll never forget how angry I got at Sailor because Milo finally called all of his money and broke Sailor. And ever since then, I've been very adamant. Anybody that I've had anything to do with poker games is not to bluff at people that are going to call you. There's a TV show called High Stakes Poker that I've played on a lot. And I think I've played on it 12 times. I've won 12 times.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, it's simply because I don't try to be fancy in it. I sit down, I try to win. These guys come in, they try to bluff, like back to the fancy play syndrome again, and it's a pleasure to play with them.
Pleasure in the most profitable way.
There's so many things you've got to think about.
Many players go through their whole poker careers without realizing how many things there are to consider when making a poker decision. You won't have time to think about all these factors every hand, but here's an important tip. When a decision seems borderline and you can't decide, rather than just hit your head against a wall trying to re-examine what you've already considered, evaluate other things. Simply, when you're in doubt about what to do, consider more factors. All these factors contribute to your quality decisions at poker. The cards you hold, what opponents are likely to hold, what opponents are unlikely to hold, your position, the position of the player who initiated the action, how many players were dealt in, how many players are active now, pot odds, implied odds, your image, the cards on the board in Oldham and Omaha, your opponent's exposed cards in 7 stud, the chances you will improve your hand, the chances opponents will improve their hands, previously exposed cards that have been folded in 7 stud, the previous sequence of betting, the playing styles of opponents, opponents' states of mind right now, who's bluffable, who's likely to bluff, who made the last bet or raise on a previous round, whether active players entered in a blind position, including you, that's for Oldham and Omaha, whether thinning the field will help or hurt, is anyone all in? Is anyone likely to be forced all in? Who's the most likely to bet if you check? Who will act after you? Can you trap opponents into betting for you? And much more. And especially if it's no limit, add these. What's the best size for a bet? Are the aggressive opponents sitting before you or after you? Are the timid opponents sitting before you or after you? Are you getting attractive odds for your call right now? If you call now, how likely are you to be able to call future bets? The size of your stacks, the size of your opponent's stacks, and more. Here's the whole list of factors again, and it's not complete either. There are literally hundreds of things you might consider. And if it's a tournament, be sure to consider whether you or your opponents can rebuy. How late is it in the tournament? Whether your table will break soon. The strength of the field. The strength of the players at your table. The number of players left in the tournament. The number of players at your table. How far you are away from reaching the money. How big your stack is relative to the size of the blinds or antes. Who has the biggest stacks at your table? Who can be forced all in at your table? Whether you're in danger of being blinded out. When the stakes will be increased. What the stakes will be at the next level. And more. Once more, here's the entire, but partial, list of factors one last time. Just remember, you won't have time to evaluate all these factors every time. But when the first things you focus on don't lead to a clear decision, evaluate more factors.
I'm the mad genius of embrace your death. I need more bullets. All I have left is my knife, but that means blood. me, friends! I need ammo! More bullets! Help me, friends! I need ammo!
Of a player before any cards are dealt. Mike's first tell says that the method of stacking chips determines a player's personality. A messy stack indicates a loose player, and a neat stack indicates a tight player.
Your opponents who put their chips in neat little stacks like these are usually conservative players. They're not looking to bluff a lot, so you do not expect them to be wild and rambunctious, and they won't bluff as much, and you shouldn't call them expecting them to have weak hands. Now conversely, if a player just doesn't care very much about how their chips appear, that's probably a loose player who's willing to gamble.
Mike's second tell says that if a player makes a messy bet, then they take the time to clean it up. They are usually bluffing.
So what happens? If the player is bluffing, he doesn't want to do anything to trigger what I call your calling reflex. The assumption is that everybody comes into the game wanting to call. This player, if he's bluffing, thinks that his bet, not being neat, might trigger your suspicions. So when you see it go like this, and he straightens that stack, that's usually was a bluff, and he's trying to cover up for it to make it look less suspicious, less inviting. That's a bluff.
Mike's third tell says that how a player buys chips is a sure sign of how they will play.
Hey, can I get some chips? Chips! When a player makes a big show of buying chips, that's a true indication of how they might play. They're probably going to play very aggressively, and they're going to be loose with their betting. But if a player comes out of his wallet like this, hardly wants to show chips, that's usually a cautious and conservative player.
Most tells are visual hints, but keep your ears open, because you can save yourself some money if you hear what Mike calls poker clack.
Yeah, it's one word, and it goes like this. What does it mean? It's a sad sound. And when you hear it in a poker game, it usually is an act. It means that player actually made a hand. So listen very carefully. When they look at their card coming on the flop at the very last card, here it comes. Whenever you hear that, that means they made their hand. They're trying to seem sad, but they're really happy.
Hold everything and listen up. When the flop comes, ignore your instincts and don't look at it.
If you're watching this flop, you're making one of the biggest mistakes in Hold'em. Don't watch the flop. Watch your opponents watch the flop. That flop will still be there later, and if you're watching it now, you'll be missing some of the most profitable tells in the game.
Something as simple as where the players look after a flop can reveal the strength of their hand. Tell number 5 says that players that look away from the flop have strong hands, and players that stare at the flop or their cards have a weak hand.
There's the flop. Here it comes. They look at it and they're immediately away. That means they like that flop. This happens quite frequently. The player wants to see what the flop is, and as soon as he recognizes that he likes it, he wants to seem uninterested. So what does he do? Looks away. Looks like this. When you see that, you know that player has made something.
Mike's sixth tell says that if a player glances at his chips after a card is revealed, he probably has a big hand.
That glance at the chips clues you in that they're thinking about betting. Why else would they do it? When you see this, that means that player liked the flop.
Lucky tell number 7 says, if the player checks the whole cards after the flop, they're probably checking for suited cards.
Players usually remember the ranks of their cards, but not necessarily the suits. When they have to double check, it's usually to see if they have one of that suit.
so watch out for your opponent's possible flush. In fact, Mike says that checking your cards can be like giving money away. One of the best things you can do is always memorize your cards.
You should never look back at your cards, because looking back at your cards can give clues to your opponent. So remember them, look once, then put a chip on top of them, protect them, and never look again. Practice doing it. That will save you money.
A shoulder shrug or sigh or any action that indicates sadness usually means that player has strong cards. They're simply acting to try to get you to call.
I bet.
Never call that bet. That's a strong hand. His sadness is meant to deceive you.
Be careful. Many people misread tell number 9. You see someone acting more nervous than usual, and you might think he's nervous about bluffing. The opposite is true. Mike's Law says that nervous betting usually accompanies a strong hand.
The player is nervous, so that player must be bluffing. Wrong! That player is never bluffing. If a player is nervous, when they bet, they bolster themselves. They look so rigid. See? Nervousness is not about a bluff. Nervousness is always a release of tension if it comes on suddenly. If a player was previously pretty steady and suddenly begins to shake, that's a release of tension. It's going for the straight flush, and now that pot is mine. It's a natural reaction, and it's never a bluff.
Ready to put your opponents to the test? Try Mike's 10th secret of tells.
A lot of times you don't really know if your opponent is bluffing or not. But you know, there's a secret way to find out. As your player begins to bet, simply reach for your chips. Your opponent, if he has a strong hand, is going to hurry his bet in there because he sees you starting to call and he doesn't want you to change your mind. But an opponent who is bluffing is going to hesitate. He's going to back down and look back and think it over. It's going to startle him. There'll be a pause before he bets. So try to prevent that bet just by reaching toward your chips. If your opponent responds by rushing his bet in, he likes the fact that you might call and doesn't want you to change your mind. But if he hesitates,
My friends, on April 1st, 2018, I recounted the story of Cradle Speedlore, where I described how 20 years of strategy, discoveries, and development all led up to the ability to beat the stage in 34 seconds on all 3 difficulties. Every single improvement, optimization, and new understanding of the game were carefully examined and blended together in a perfect symphony of speedrunning that led to 34-second runs on Agent in the year 2005 and on the more challenging Secret and Double Agent in the year 2015. And while the idea of a theoretical 33-second run was entertained at the end of the Speedlore episode, it was just that, theoretical. And if we look at the GoldenEye rankings just 2 weeks ago, we'd see that nothing had changed. But today, the rankings look like this. So what the heck happened that turned Cradle 33s from a pipe dream into an overnight reality? So Wednesday, September the 5th was a pretty normal day in the speedrunning world. And as normal days go, once evening falls, there are often a bunch of streams going and lively discussion in the community Discord channel. And like many nights before that one, some of the Discord discussion involved theory crafting strategies in the GoldenEye speed game, which, if you're familiar with theory crafting at all, usually leads nowhere beyond some healthy brain exercise and thought experiments. Well, that night's topic of discussion was indeed the Cradle stage. David Clemens in particular seemed intent on figuring out a legitimate path to get 33 seconds on the stage. Clem shared the tool-assisted speedrun done in 2010 by Henrik Weister Nordgren as a possible source of inspiration, where he notes that Trevelyan's speed in this specific run, which is a random element, is pretty slow, and suspects that a more modern TAS could perhaps push something like 32 seconds. Flickerform, and correctly I'd say, points out that the method in which Henrik blew up the console, Objective A, is not feasible as quickly on console, as it's commonly known the Nintendo 64 emulates inaccurately, and you'd never have low enough lag to destroy the console with those shots so quickly. Clem points out though that you could do it a little slower than TAS still, and it would still have a chance at 33 because he thinks the Trevelyan speed was really that notably slow on this TAS run. Then I catch wind of the conversation and just am dumbfounded by how much time is obviously saved by staying to the right of the large engine in what we call the Trev hut. You see, if there's one thing that's remained consistent across the last 20 years, it's that every strategy that was used at a time to get the world records on Cradle involved going to the left of the large engine and blowing up the Objective A console ourselves on the way out of the room to finish the mission. But something just clicked that night. Why the heck are we not trying to go to the right? Yeah, we don't know exactly how we'll be able to destroy the Objective A console from over there yet, but let's play around with it and see what we can come up with. That same night, the upstart and now top 25 ranked player, Irie Butler, got this run.
Come on, there has to be a 33 fail. Yes, dude!
The Trev kill, Objective B, went as normal, blowing up the drone and shooting Trevelyan on the same frame. He takes damage from the drone explosion. Irie then turns, attempts the TAS-style console, but misses, runs to the end, and boom, a 33-second failed run. If only he had hit 5 bullets on the console, we would have seen the untied world record. Karl Jobst would get a similar 33-second run, killing Trevelyan but failing the console.
No!
And then David Clemens got this run.
Ooh! Dude, did you guys see that? Did you guys see that f***ing console? Oh my god, that was so quick.
So Clemens showed us that the TAS-style console was indeed doable on, well, console. Difficult, yes, but doable. But not long after, Irie Butler got this run. He killed Trevelyan, attempted to shoot the console, missed. However, Objective A still completed as he was running towards the end of the stage. What this revealed to us was that sometimes, and it would later be determined to be about 30% of the time, Trevelyan will drop a grenade as he dies. This grenade can land in many different places in that hut, but if it lands in this small outlined area, which seems to happen somewhere around 10 to 25% of the time when he drops a grenade, it will also destroy the Objective A console. So basically this strategy became a spray and pray method of kill Trevelyan with a drone explosion and just run to the end, hoping that Trev drops a grenade close enough to the Objective A console to destroy it. Yeah, it makes the level a little more luck-based, but as I always point out, this sort of luck often ends up rewarding consistency and skill rather than gifting an unmatchable record to less skilled players. And the real result of this all is that pretty much anyone who had the skill to get 34 seconds the old way, which was a lot of people, can now get 33 seconds. So this initiated a rare gold rush in GoldenEye, a new strategy being discovered, resulting in a race to get the untied world records, where people who might not usually be capable of getting untieds are absolutely in the mix to do so. And in this case, 3 untieds were up for grabs on the 3 difficulties of Cradle. Dozens of streams went live, all with the hopes of getting the run that would go down in GoldenEye history for the ages. On Friday, September 7, it felt like Karl and Clemens streamed all through the day and night, 2 titans battling for the untied. so you can imagine it was quite the shock when, in the stream of 26th place ranked Timmy Johansson, this happened. You can really see Timmy go through the mix of emotions from shock, elation, disbelief, and he'd leave his stream on for about another 2 hours, just bathing in the aftermath of a historic GoldenEye Untied world record, as we've all done. To remind you, Cradle Agent 34 was set by Brian Bosshart on December 19, 2005, remained untied for nearly 2 years, would eventually be tied by 61 others, and stood as the record for 4,637 days, just shy of 13 years. Timmy was mostly thrilled to have etched his name forever in GoldenEye history, a game he's played a lot and come to care deeply about. He knew the Untied wouldn't last long, but he took solace in the fact that, forever, he will have been the first man to beat Cradle in 33 seconds. And last long it did not. Only a few hours later, both David Clemens and Irie Butler tied the 33 on Agent, which left me wondering, why didn't those guys play Secret or Double Agent to get those Untieds first instead? Agent is a fair bit easier than the other two difficulties. The guards aren't as accurate and take less damage to kill, and your auto-aim is stronger, but Trevelyan's kill works exactly the same. In any case, this just prolonged the battle for the remaining Untieds. The following day, we were all shocked to see an old familiar name. Wouter Jansen not only started up his stream, but got a completion using the new strategy in 34 seconds. His first personal or world record since October 2014. So naturally, many were cheering for the old legend of the game, the guy who achieved more records than anyone else in GoldenEye history to nail one of the Untieds. But of course, as usually happens in speedrunning, sport, or anywhere in life, the coolest story is the one that rarely ends up happening. September 8th turned into 9th. By now, Carl and Wotus had tied Agent 33, but the other difficulties didn't want to give. However, as the night of the 10th became the 11th, we saw two remarkable speedruns.
Yeah, and the sad thing is I've actually had like decent trap build consistency today. It's just I haven't gotten made that will actually do anything. When you actually have good trap build consistency and you're still not gonna nade, it's pretty fucking cool. I think it was a slow trout. I think it's 34. Oh my god! Yes! Haha! Yeah! I'm a fucking legend. I'm the Cradle legend, dude. I am the Cradle legend.
Yes! Untied world record. That's right. Redemption. Redemption, dude. Redemption, dude.
Cradle, Agent, Secret, and 00 Agent, all done in 33 seconds. 3 seconds stripped from GoldenEye's total time, and the end of a rare gold rush in the speed game. Interestingly, the last gold rush was also on Cradle in October 2015, when the drone explosion Trev kill was first discovered and understood. The world record was of course already 34 on Agent, but it would be David Clemens and Dan Swiss Parker who would get the 34s on Secret and 00 Agent that time around, revealing Clemens' absolute mastery and poise when it comes to getting these clutch untieds. The skill needed for Cradle 33 isn't that high. Pretty much anyone in the top 50 or 100 could have been capable of getting the untied, yet Clemens, in Old Time Legend, beat out the rest of the competition in both these cases.